Hi guys. So in this video series, we will discuss the Dockers, everything about Dockers. Basically, we will start from scratch and we will see basically how we can use Dockers to with basically Kubernetes, how we can use Dockers with Swarm and all. So we will discuss everything about the Dockers. Okay. And we will also see initially we'll have a discussion how we can use Dockers, where we need, and what kind of issues the Dockers resolve basically. Okay, that we will see. And future we'll see few more things. So initially, if we just talk about what are the Dockers or how we can basically use the Dockers or for what kind of solution we are having this Docker services or whatever we call it. Okay, so these are basically, we can say, some services we run over top of the NOS to achieve multiple services on the same NOS. Okay, so what exactly these are? So let me explain first of all. Without Dockers, if we are using multiple services, or let's say I want to run multiple services, I want to have multiple services in my company, right? And then how we can basically achieve that without Dockers. And then finally, we will discuss how exactly Dockers will help us to achieve the same requirement without wasting much resources, extra money, and so on. Okay. Now, so in the early stage of servers, right? So assume that time if we are just talking about, let's say we don't have the Dockers and these things running, or we don't have those solutions. So how exactly we were dealing in early stage of servers, right? So assume I want to run Python, I want to run PHP, I want to run few more services, MySQL, Apache, and all, right? So that time, what was the idea basically? So we were actually using these multiple servers, right? So if I'll just talk about, so um, let's say we have server number one. Let me change the color. Yeah. So we have server number one. Okay, server number two here we do have, server number three here we do have, four, and so on. Now assume I want to run multiple services. So that time, what we were doing actually, we were having one physical server for one single service is running, right? It means if I want to run a service for my company, right? I need to have one server. That is okay. I can run again to another server, different service, and again. I can run that, right? But the issue, the issue is if I'm running one single service on a single server, so that server will have basically, first of all, a good number of resources, right? So what we are doing only on that good number of resources, we are just running on single services. It means what we are doing here, we are just wasting the resources, right? But yeah, initially we were doing that actually. After that, what solution we had actually? So after these things, right? So what we can do actually, we have basically a solution that is VM solution, virtualization, right? Now, how that resolve this issue, first of all. So we have a better version of this one then, right? So let me go to the next slide. Yeah. Now, the moment we talk about the VM images, okay, it means now what we do have here, we have virtual images, right? Virtual machine we can use here. So we will be holding one single bare metal. It means earlier what we were doing, assume we have multiple services. So that time we need multiple physical servers. But right now, what we need in the solution of VM images, what we need here, a single bare metal server. It means a single good resource servers we will be having. Assume we have a UCS server with good amount of resources, right? And then over top of that, what we can do, we can actually use any of these NOS. So we can use basically E6i NOS, or we can use KVM hypervisor, or we can use Microsoft Hyper-V. Any of these virtualization solution we can use. And then over top of that, what we can do, as we know, the E6i or the KVM or these Hyper-V, they support multiple NOS. So if I talk about the E6i, right, what we can do, that's a VMware solution, right? So what we can actually deploy multiple OVA images on the single server, right? It means bare metal. Over top of that, we can have the E6i, right? And then over top of E6i, we can have multiple nodes running. So you see here, we can have E6i, we can have the KVM, we can have the hypervisor, Microsoft hypervisor over top of single bare metal. It means one single service I will be running here, one single node. And then over top of that, we can have multiple nodes running. And inside those nodes, we can enable the services. It means instead of having multiple physical servers, what we are doing, we are using this virtualization solution where I can have a single environment, and then over top of that, we can have multiple nodes, right? So this solution we were using. Now, if I talk about the VMware solution, we have to use an image that is OVA image. So this VMware only support OVA, or you can use OVF also, right? Both are almost similar. The moment we talk about the KVM hypervisor, that is Linux based actually. Okay, so we have to basically install a Linux server on the top of bare metal Linux NOS, right? And then over top of that, on the Linux, we can enable the KVM services. And then what we can use, we can actually use QCOW images to install multiple NOS. And the same way, if we are using Microsoft Hyper-V on this bare metal, right? What we can do then, over top of that, we can install multiple NOS, and then we can enable multiple services. But in this condition also, now, first of all, this resolve the issue of multiple physical servers. Now what we do have a single bare metal where we have a good amount of resources. And then what we are doing, we are having multiple nodes. But still we have some issues. What issues we do have? First of all, we have multiple nodes even over top of that virtualization, right? So even here, if I want to just use a specific services, I need to have one single node for that services, right? So that we were doing actually in the case of VM images. Now, the moment we talk about the Dockers, that resolve all these issues. How? Let me go to the next slide. Yeah. So this time, what we will have here, first of all, that bare metal, the solution we had earlier. Over top of that, NOS, whatever NOS you want to, let's say I'm using A6i, or I'm using, let's say, KVM hypervisor. So let's say I'm running here Linux. Most of the time we use Linux here. Okay, so let's say we are using Linux. Now over top of Linux, I will enable the Docker services. Sometimes we call these as containers also. So here you can see Dockers and containers. So sometimes we call as containers, sometimes we call as Dockers, right? So first we have the bare metal, then we have the NOS, and then over top of that, what we do have, we have the Docker services running. Now, what we can do actually, using these Dockers, we can have multiple services running or multiple containers. So it means, you see, a single node that handle multiple services without affecting the other. It means what you can do here, you can enable multiple services. How you can enable multiple services here? Using a single Docker services, we can have multiple service with different port numbers actually. So what we do here actually, assume I want to run two services. Okay. So let's say I want to have HTTPS. Okay. So what I'll do here, so I'll be using one of the services with 443, but 443 will be the port number for the public use. Internally, I'll be using a random port number. Assume I'm using 8080. Now I want to run assume HTTP services again, HTTPS service again. But how I can do that now? I can actually use another, let's say, 8081 I can use. So internally, what I can do now, using the Dockers and using these services, what I can do, I can enable multiple port numbers to utilize all those services. It means using a single bare metal, single NOS, and single Docker services running. What we can do, we can have multiple Dockers over top of that. So these Dockers are services basically. The moment we talk about the Dockers, we can enable multiple Dockers each per service, and then this is how we can achieve the requirement. It means now you see the initially we had multiple servers running, right? Then what actually the issue was there, multiple physical servers wasting multiple resources, right? Then what solution we had? A single bare metal over top of that ESXi. But even that time we were running the multiple nodes where we were wasting the resources again because we are using multiple nodes. Let's say the storage, if I talk about, one single node is consuming, let's say 15 GB around. So if I run 10 services, so they will consume 150 GB. But now what we do have, so if this node is consuming 15 GB, it will only consume 15 GB while running these old 10 services or whatever services I want to run. If you want to run 10 services, 20 services, you can run, right? And your nodes will only consume the same single nodes storage, right? So this is how Dockers can basically help us. So you see overall, what is the thing here we have is The moment we talk about multiple services, I want to run multiple services on a single NOS machine. How I can do that using Dockers containers, we can achieve that. So this is how basically we use these services and we can achieve this. Now, next. So let me rub these. So now we'll just talk about like what exactly we do have further, okay, and how we can use that. Basically, few more components we'll discuss. Okay. So the moment we will start these Dockers, we will see what are the Docker images, what are the Docker registry, what are the Docker containers. Containers are the same again thing, right? So the moment we will start Dockers, we'll be using Dockers, right? We will be basically building some images. We will be checking some registries. We will be using some containers over there. So all these things we'll discuss, okay, that time. But these are the main components we have in the Dockers. Okay, so yeah, let's wind up here. In the next session, we will discuss or we will see how we can bring up a Docker on a Linux machine, and we'll see how we can bring up a Docker on, let's say, Mac, on maybe Microsoft Hyper-V, or multiple things we'll see. Okay, so next session, we'll see or we'll check even how we can build these images, the basic images, basically, very few basic commands we'll see from the scratch, actually. And if we have multiple different nodes, I'm using Microsoft or Mac or Linux, how we can basically install the Docker over top of the NOS.